Hey, Focus learners, welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because, honestly, what we're looking at is going to fundamentally change how you view the world. We're diving into the hidden and often completely unmeasured forces behind extreme success and extreme failure. You know, we all love to think that every outcome in life is just the direct result of our own hard work and brilliant decisions, right? But today we're going to explore the invisible forces that are actually pulling the strings in the background.
Okay, let's dive into this. Look at this quote from NYU professor Scott Galloway. He says, "Nothing is as good or as bad as it seems." And this is going to serve as our guiding principle for this entire explainer. When we look at legendary success or even catastrophic failure, our brains desperately want a simple story of cause and effect. We just want to believe the winner was simply a genius and the loser made terrible choices. But as you'll see in a minute, the truth is way more complex than that.
Section 1. A 1 in a million head start. The origin of a billion-dollar empire.
So to really grasp how these hidden forces work, we kind of need to time travel back to 1968, to Lakeside School in Seattle. This is where we find an incredibly bright 8th grader named Bill Gates. Now in 1968, computers were these massive, prohibitively expensive machines. But Lakeside had this math and science teacher named Bill Duggle. He was a former Navy pilot who firmly believed that just studying books wasn't enough. So he actually petitioned the school's Mothers Club to use about $3,000 from an annual rummage sale to lease a teletype Model 30 computer, which was hooked up to a mainframe for time-sharing. Guys, this was revolutionary. Keep in mind, the whole concept of time-sharing had only been invented like 3 years prior in 1965. Dougall's decision gave Bill Gates and his friend Paul Allen access to technology that most university graduate schools didn't even have at the time. They could just tinker, code, and let their creativity run wild, literally day and night.
Now, this is where the math gets genuinely mind-blowing. Let's zoom out a bit and look at the UN data for 1968. If we walk through this cascading funnel, you'll see what I mean. There were roughly 303 million high school-age people in the world. Filter that down. About 18 million lived in the US. Filter again, you get 270,000 in Washington state. Down again, a little over 100,000 in the Seattle area. And at the very, very bottom of this funnel, only about 300 of those kids attended Lakeside School. So the crucial point here is this staggering number, 1 in a million. You start with 303 million teenagers globally, and you end with the 300 at Lakeside. Roughly 1 in a million high school-age students attended the one school that had the unique combination of cash and foresight to actually buy a computer, and Bill Gates just happened to be one of them. Now, don't get me wrong, Gates is staggeringly smart and ridiculously hardworking, but even he openly admits the role of this statistical anomaly. He literally said, if there had been no Lakeside, there would have been no Microsoft.
All right, moving to Section 2, luck's close sibling, Risk, the forgotten third prodigy.
We all know the legendary story of Gates and Paul Allen, right? But history usually omits a massive twist. There was actually a third member of this gang of computer prodigies. His name was Kent Evans. Look at the incredible parallel between these two kids. By Gates' own account, Kent was the best student in the class. I mean, they were completely identical in skill. The school actually tasked Bill and Kent together to build a complex software program to automate the school's entire class schedule. And they actually pulled it off as children. Plus, Kent shared Bill's endless ambition. Gates remembers Kent always walking around carrying this big lawyer's briefcase. They would just talk on the phone endlessly, scheming about their future, wondering if they should be CEOs or generals together. They were basically destined to conquer the business world side by side. But that never happened. Tragically, Kent Evans died in a mountaineering accident before he even graduated high school. And the statistics here are just chilling. Every year, there are only about 36 mountaineering deaths in the entire United States. The odds of being killed on a mountain in high school are roughly 1 in a million. That is the exact same odds as ending up at a high school with a computer in 1968.
And that brings us perfectly to our core definition, luck and risk. Think of them like identical twins, right? But they're working in opposite directions with the exact same magnitude. Bill Gates experienced 1 in a million luck. Kent Evans experienced 1 in a million risk. They both illustrate the reality that every single outcome in life is guided by forces other than just our individual effort. Why? Because you are just one person playing in a massively complex game with 7 billion other people and infinite moving parts. The accidental impact of actions completely outside your control, they can often be far more consequential than the ones you consciously take.
Section 3, bold genius or reckless criminal, the millimeter-thick line of success.
So if we accept this wild reality of luck and risk, how does it change the way we evaluate legendary business titans? Take a look at this quote from Cornelius Vanderbilt. He was expanding his massive railroad empire, and an advisor actually warned him that every single transaction he agreed to was breaking the law. Vanderbilt notoriously replied, "My God, John, you don't suppose you can run a railroad in accordance with the statutes of the state of New York, do you?" He just flagrantly flaunted the law, and honestly, it was vital to building his wildly successful empire. We read that today, and we're like, wow, what a scrappy visionary. He didn't let outdated laws stop his innovation. But it really forces us to ask, was he inspiringly bold or just foolishly reckless? Let's use a quick what-if reframing here. What if Vanderbilt's young company had immediately collapsed under a massive court order and he was thrown in prison? Would we still view his flagrant crime as sage visionary wisdom? Of course not. We'd call him a reckless criminal. It's the exact same action, just a different flip of the risk and luck coin.
You can actually see this hypocrisy perfectly illustrated in modern tech. Look at this. In 2006, Mark Zuckerberg turned down a massive $1 billion buyout offer from Yahoo. Today, the public verdict is that he's a visionary genius who stuck to his guns. But look at the next row. Yahoo turned down a massive buyout offer from Microsoft. The public verdict? They get mocked as foolish failures who should have cashed out while they could. So what's the actual lesson here? Should you sell your company or hold it? It is quite literally impossible to know because the line between bold and reckless is about a millimeter thick, and you can only ever see it in hindsight.
And look, even the undisputed titans of finance face this exact same thing. Benjamin Graham is the father of value investing. He's Warren Buffett's mentor. Yet the vast majority of his investing success came from owning one enormous chunk of Geico stock. By doing this, he basically broke nearly every single rule of diversification that he himself had written in his famous textbooks. Graham himself actually questioned it later in life, asking if it was one lucky break or one supremely shrewd decision. Seriously, when even the father of value investing can't pin down his own ratio of skill to luck, we know for sure we're dealing with a deeply complex issue.
Section 4. Focus on broad patterns. How to actually learn from success and failure.
Okay, this all leads us to the ultimate question. What do we do with this? How do we actually learn from success and failure? Well, the very first step is acknowledging that extreme examples are driven by extreme ends of luck and risk. This is exactly why studying absolute outliers like Warren Buffett or Elon Musk can actually be pretty dangerous for your own life. Their massive world-altering success involves unrepeatable 1 in a billion luck. You literally cannot reliably emulate their luck. The more extreme the outcome, the less likely you can apply its specific lessons to your own everyday life, simply because the outcome was so heavily swayed by the extreme tails of the probability curve. Instead, what we really should be doing is focusing on broad, common patterns. One of my favorite historians, Frederick Lewis Allen, spent his entire career studying just the median average American, what they ate, how they worked, how they lived. You will find infinitely more actionable takeaways by looking for broad patterns of success and failure that apply to the masses. For example, observing that people who have control over their time tend to be happier is a broad, common pattern that you can absolutely apply to your life, which is way more useful than trying to perfectly time some once-in-a-lifetime monopoly investment. And this brilliantly illustrates a point from the guy we actually started this whole explainer with, Bill Gates. He famously said, "Success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking they can't lose." Whenever things are going incredibly well in your life or your business, you have to remind yourself that it's probably not quite as good as it seems. You absolutely must acknowledge the role luck played in bringing you there and just remain humble, because luck's sibling, risk, can turn your story around just as quickly. But here is the flip side, and it's equally important. Failure can also be a lousy teacher. It completely seduces smart people into thinking their decisions were terrible, when sometimes those decisions were perfectly mathematically sound, and they just experienced the unforgiving reality of risk. Let's say you made a bet with an 80% chance of success, and you just happened to land in the 20%. Because of this, we have to leave room for forgiveness and understanding when judging failures, both in others and, honestly, most importantly, in ourselves. The trick isn't about never failing. The trick is arranging your life so that one failure doesn't wipe you out. You gotta stay in the game until the odds fall in your favor. I want to leave you with a provocative question to ponder today. When you look back at your own past failures, were they genuinely the result of bad decisions, or did you just experience the unforgiving reality of risk? Take a minute to rethink your own life's narrative through this lens. Remember, you're just one piece in a massive game with 7 billion moving parts. Nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems. Thank you so much for joining me on this Explainer Today, focused learners. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.